When he came out, his legs were barely working. I mean, he could hardly walk at all. He had those heavy braces on his legs, and it was a very tragic case. He couldn't get over what happened to him in the war, and he decided that what he would do is go back to his people in the Southwest on the reservation, tell them what happened to him, say goodbye, and return and spend the rest of his life in the Veterans Hospital. Bear in mind, they haven't seen him in 11 or 12 years. And all of a sudden, he comes back crawling, crippled, on these leg braces. And this is what happened. They hold counsel, and they say, Chet LaHaye, tell us what happened to you. So he begins to tell the story. Now, how did he tell it? He didn't tell it in a screaming, yelling, oh my God, was I victimized in my horrible way. Instead, what David did was he told it in an almost impersonal way, like a story way, as if he was observing his own life but not attached to it, observing but not attached to it. And he was fine until he got to this one point where he starts telling them about this one particular Nazi guard who would take maggots and chicken gizzards and shove it down his throat, and he didn't have either the strength nor the freedom to fight this man, and he'd just have to endure that. And his tribal members who had gathered around him, they just listened. They didn't sit there and say, oh my, what a horrible thing, and give this kind of feedback. All they did was witness. Now, at the end of it, they held counsel because they wanted to help him. And what they decided to do was this. They tied a rope around his waist, they threw him into very deep water, and they said, Chet LaHaye, call your spirit back, or we're going to let you go, because no one can live without a spirit. And they stood back. David went through, he said he had to walk through every one of these memories, every memory that had his spirit, that captured some part of his being, that controlled some part of his heart and his mind. And he had to cut the strings, he had to let them go, until he got to that one Nazi guard. And now in his image, he's facing, in this dream state, in this out-of-body state, this Nazi guard, and he's looking at him. And he's literally, now I want to reorient you, he's in cold, deep water with almost useless legs, going through this very sacred life review. And he's in front of this Nazi, and he finally says, all right, I forgive you. But the forgiveness was not just mental, it was down through his being. And then this image spoke to him and said, Chet LaHaye, I was trying to keep you alive, and that was the only food I could find. And in that exchange, David got his legs back. When he returned, when he swam back to shore, he was able to begin his healing, and he never returned to this Veterans Hospital. Now, the significance of this is he didn't find out the truth behind that situation until he was able to forgive and move on. And that was the reward, was truth. Truth. Not the illusion that was capturing his spirit, but truth. I want you to think about that story and hold it in your heart, because if we forgive the things that we've been holding on to in the past, all of a sudden we have 50 gallons more of fuel, $50 more to spend. Our life is going to move faster. It's as simple as that. And we are more afraid of the speed of change than we are of forgiving somebody. We're afraid to forgive because we know in our gut our life will move faster, that we'll have more change than we know how to handle in a period of time, that we're not designed for quick change. We're terrified of it. And what I realize is one of the reasons, if not the strongest reason, we hold on to the painful past is because it's a way of stopping pain in the future from coming toward us. So the longer we hold on to a painful yesterday, it's like saying to heaven, no, 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 see, I'm still trying to heal this. So go slowly on me, okay, because I really don't. And what you do is you hold on to this. But the other reason is it gives you a belief that you can control the speed at which change occurs in your life. And it's a very comforting thought, although it's a false one. Because one way or another, these changes are going to happen. And what I want to, it's amazing to me every time, because as you unravel and talk to people, like, why are you holding on to this wound? Inevitably, the time factor will work its way in there. Well, I'm not ready. I need more time. What they're really saying is, I'm not ready for my life to move faster. I like the time zone I'm in. I know exactly where my dishes are. I know who's coming over for dinner. I know all of the way my house is set. And that's what we're really afraid of. It's not that forgiveness scares us so much. It's that it will cause our lives to change so rapidly. That's what we're terrified of. Forgiveness, healing, has a great deal of mythology associated with it. A great deal of mythology. I call it myths. In my work, I've decided that there really are 5 central myths that go along with this process of healing, and why can't we heal? And they're surrounded, in one sense, they have forgiveness as a sideline, but then there are personal myths that we seem to hook onto that interfere tremendously with the healing process, and it's worth knowing what they are. The first is, my life is defined by my wounds, which of course is the core of the woundology experience. But it also helps when someone believes that, they'll look for wounds through which to support their life. It's not just the wounds that perhaps have come through some means that they really didn't have control over, like what happens to you as a child. But if your life is defined by wounds, you've got to go out shopping for them if you've run out. I mean, you really do. You have to make sure you find a relationship. And they say, well, that one wounded me, I'll take that one. You have to find some kind of relationship that keeps the wound momentum going, because you can't afford to run out. What are you going to talk about, right? I remember one woman said, I'm giving this lecture, I don't know where I was. I was giving this lecture and I'm saying, you know, you got to give up wounds. It's a real, you know, at some point it becomes very burdensome. Out of the balcony, this voice comes, I don't know, she shoots out and she says, I can't do that. What will I talk about? And I, you know, and I'm looking, and I'm trying to look at her like this, like, who's talking? But I realize, I mean, it is so terrifying. But anyway, that's one of the myths. The second one is that being healthy means being alone. We have a real belief. We don't really have a model for what the healthy, vulnerable person looks like. Instead, our model of the healthy person is that when you're healthy, you're totally alone and able to take care of yourself. You have no emotional needs. Your body's perfect. You don't age, and all is well. Right? That's not the way it is. The truth is that we need to have a model that says we're healing all the time, and being healthy means being vulnerable. You can still be close to people. We need to rethink that model. The third is that feeling pain means being destroyed by pain. Pain is not the enemy. Oftentimes, pain is a guardian. Just think about it. If your body falls into patterns of pain, it's telling you something's wrong here. That's not the enemy. It's a language. Pain is a language. It can also be a very guiding force that says, I'm going to tell you, you can't walk on one leg anymore. You have to get yourself balanced or you're going to be in pain. So that when we look at pain from a different angle entirely, we're going to have a very different relationship with it, and it won't be frightening. Rather, it'll be something you could look at and say, this is a language that's talking to me, and get all the information you can from it. Squeeze the information out of it, because that's what it can offer you. If your body's in pain, it's talking to you. The fourth mythology, and it's one that's very popular, is we believe that all illness, currently, one of the most popular beliefs, let me put it that way, is that all illness is caused by negativity. That's not accurate. All illness is not caused by negativity. But we've held on to that because it seemed in the beginning to be such an incredible thing to discover. What? That it's not just caused by random things and viruses, this kind of thing, that I actually have some kind of contributing energy to an illness. Well, yes, we do. And at the same time, that's not the cause for all illnesses.